has been labeled by these specialists. They Steven suddenly the veil is torn.
It's 1959, and on February 16, Fidel Castro declared himself as Prime Minister. But the revolution was only a month old, and Castro needed to consolidate himself at the top. To win the hearts of the people, Fidel Castro began a massive wave of reform in Cuba, but also began nationalizing and seizing American-owned plantations and properties. As American companies were ousted, the US responded by canceling the import of Cuban sugar, and relations quickly became strained. Castro's trip to the US in April 1959 hoped to ease some tension, but Eisenhower wouldn't meet Castro, and Castro's meeting with Vice President Nixon only left bitter feelings. To add fuel to the fire, in March 1960, when a French vessel called La Cuba, carrying weapons purchased by Cuba, mysteriously exploded, Cuba blamed the US government for sabotage. During the funeral procession of fallen Cubans, Che Guevara's iconic photo quickly became a symbol of the idealist underdog and revolutionary. And in the same month, Eisenhower secretly authorized the CIA's plan to overthrow Castro's government. On September 1960, going to New York for the General Assembly of the United Nations, Castro met Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev and reaffirmed their friendly relationship by leading the applause to one another's speeches. As John F. Kennedy took office in 1961, diplomatic relations had been formally cut off between the US and Cuba. And Kennedy inherited Eisenhower administration's plan to invade Cuba. But instead of the original plan to attack Trinidad, Kennedy ordered the attack to proceed on the Bay of Pigs and reduced air support in an effort to deny US involvement afterwards. With a flawed plan, and after an initial air bombardment, 1,334 heavily armed CIA-trained Cuban exiles landed in Cuba on April 17, 1961, hoping to sneak ashore unopposed, secure the area, and appeal for American intervention while rallying on a mass uprising against Castro. But everything that could go wrong went wrong. Castro knew of the invasion days in advance through his intelligence channels, and the invasion was spotted right away, taking away the element of surprise. The Cuban Air Force wasn't neutralized beforehand, and the mass uprising didn't happen. So the invasion became a spectacular failure, and in 2 days, the Cuban army captured more than 1,100 invaders. And after the sensational triumph of the Castro regime, Castro called for a public celebration and declared Cuba to be a communist state and allied itself firmly with the USSR. But a fiercely independent Castro who opposed American intervention later let the USSR station 43,000 soldiers and built nuclear arsenals in his country. Why? Well, he had no choice. Having a communist country under their nose was unacceptable to American politicians, so the Castros were under constant threat of another US-backed coup. So Che goes to Moscow, agreeing to a defense pact behind the scenes. Part of the pact was deployment of nuclear missiles, which was done in utter secret. In response to American nuclear missiles stationed in Turkey, if the Soviet Union succeeded in deploying missiles in Cuba, It could restore the balance of power of nuclear arsenals between the two countries. While the US had some ideas about Soviet missile shipments to Cuba, because of fear of another U-2 surveillance plane being shot down and causing an international incident, the US couldn't confirm its suspicions. A belated U-2 reconnaissance flight in October 1962 confirmed the Soviet medium-range ballistic missile being assembled and forced Kennedy to do something about it.
These specialists. Suddenly the veil is torn from the Russian secrets.
Faced with the most difficult decision of his presidency, Kennedy was careful and skeptical, as opposed to his Joint Chief of Staff, who unanimously agreed to an airstrike on the missile sites. Kennedy instead ordered a naval blockade, which was still an act of war according to international law. On October 23, 1962, he authorized the naval quarantine of Cuba, and the world anxiously hoped for a resolution.
The United States' answer to what Adlai Stevenson termed Soviet blackmail in Cuba was a quarantine of all offensive weapons being shipped from Russia to that island fortress. The U.S. threw up a steel fence, prepared to stop any vessel carrying materials of war.
Castro brashly called for a preemptive nuclear strike on the US, and tensions rose to new heights on October 27, when a Soviet nuclear submarine almost fired a torpedo onto the American Navy. And an American U-2 plane was shot down over Cuba the same day. However, behind the scenes, Robert Kennedy meets secretly with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin to remove missiles from Cuba in return for two conditions: to never invade Cuba and withdraw nuclear missiles from Turkey. On October 28, the official resolution to this crisis was declared.
The curtain goes up at the United Nations on what the world hopes is the final act in the drama that was the Cuban crisis.
Castro was infuriated by this deal, as he seemed to not mind the prospect of nuclear Armageddon. World War III was averted. As the Castro regime consolidated its grip, it had been accused of human rights abuses, and American forces likewise violated human rights in its base at Guantanamo Bay. Hundreds and thousands of Cubans fled the country seeking freedom, mostly to the United States. The collapse of the USSR would then change the dynamics of Cuban politics. As Cuban-US relations still hang in the balance, it's interesting to see how Cuba went through its tumultuous times and continues to define its place in the world. Thank you, and please subscribe and like, and we'll be back with other interesting topics.